This is a recording of a talk I gave at Santa Rosa Junior College in their Arts and Lectures program. I discussed a psychotic episode that I had about 30 years ago and the role that spirituality played in my personal recovery. This episode in my life has served as the foundation for my own work in the field of psychology, and it has also served as my own personal spiritual awakening. I'm going to talk today about the topic of spiritual emergence and emergency. And as Jürgen mentioned, I was involved in proposing a new diagnostic category for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 4, which is often kind of colloquially called the Bible of mental health. How many of you are involved in mental health or studying psychology at this point? Okay, a lot of you. So you probably have heard of the DSM. Currently, I'm actually on a work group for the DSM-5, which is planned for the year to be published in the year 2012. An interesting year to publish that particular document, given a lot of the other things that are supposed to happen in that year. And over the last few years, I have been invited to speak on this topic in Moscow, in Brazil, in Portugal, in Mexico, in France, and in the UK. And it's kind of interesting because nobody has ever asked me what my credentials are for talking about the topic of spirituality. I actually don't hold any degrees in theology. I've never actually taken a course in Bible studies or anything related specifically to religion while I was in college or in graduate school. I'm not an ordained minister of any type. I'm not a spiritual teacher in any particular lineage. Yet I find myself now in this role as being categorized as an expert in this topic area. And so I want to explain a little bit about how I achieved the kind of expertise that allows me to hold forth on this. So Frank, would you show us the first slide? This is the first major resource that I've made use of in the pursuit of expertise. And now I can do. And the Complete Idiot's Guide to Awakening Your Spirituality was the other resource that I've used. Well, actually, it was something a little less maybe humorous, but also kind of idiosyncratic that catapulted me into this position, and that was my own spiritual crisis. And the term spiritual emergency has been used to describe what I went through. It's a crisis related to sudden spiritual emergence during which the process of growth and change becomes chaotic and overwhelming. In such episodes, individuals often suddenly and dramatically enter into new realms of mystical and spiritual experience. However, they may also become fearful and confused and have difficulty coping with their daily lives, jobs, and relationships. So my actual experience, which happened in 1971, I think I'll say a little bit about, just because it is germane to how my work in this field has unfolded. And during the fall of 1971, after having dropped out of graduate school at Harvard, where I'd been studying anthropology, and then hitchhiking around the country, having gotten rid of everything I owned that wouldn't fit into a backpack. And even though it's 1971, it is culturally what we call the 60s. I mean, the 60s really kind of were like 65 to 1973-ish. So I ended up in San Francisco, and being in the Bay Area in the 60s, somebody offered me a tab of LSD. And feeling that I was on the road to find out and try new things that I'd never done before, I took it. And actually, during the day that I was on the LSD, I had a nice, pleasant experience. I was out in nature, watched the sunset. And at the end of that day, I said to myself, well, that was interesting. I might do that again sometime. But it really didn't have that dramatic of an effect on me. The next morning, I woke up, and I pulled out one of the books I was carrying around in my backpack, a book by Alan Watts on Zen and enlightenment, a book I had thumbed through, at previous points in my backpacking or hitchhiking experience, and it had all seemed a little bit like word salad or word play to me. It really hadn't made a lot of sense to me. And all of a sudden, when I started to read it, it made perfect sense to me. I knew exactly what Alan Watts was talking about when he talked about enlightenment and seeing through the social game that our societies create for us and all that. And that was really the only thing I noticed. I didn't even really attribute it to taking LSD or anything. 4 days later, 4 days after the LSD, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I walked into the bathroom of a house I was staying at, and I looked in the mirror, and for some reason I was holding my hand in this exact position, which now I know is called a mudra. I didn't have any vocabulary to describe it back then. And it was glowing, giving off white light. And I knew immediately what that meant. Now, as a licensed psychologist, I would call this a delusional insight, but what I knew it meant was that I was a reincarnation of Buddha. I also, in that same flash, realized that I was a reincarnation of Christ, and that I had a mission, which was to write a new holy book, a holy book that would unite all the peoples of the world. Now, remember, I had never taken any courses in religion or theology, so my understanding of all this was very naive. I'd also been raised in a Jewish kind of agnostic household, so I hadn't learned Hebrew or been members of a temple or anything. So my naive understanding was that Buddha had created a world religion for the East. Let's ignore Hinduism and other things. Christianity was a religion for the West, and I was going to create a new world religion. And so I actually set out right then and there, took out what was a journal that I was keeping, and converted that into this new holy book and started to write my insights into how to create a new society and a new world religion. And I spent the next 5 days sleeping very little, taking like an hour nap here, an hour nap there. I was having conversations, really interesting conversations, not only with Jesus and Buddha, but with Locke and Rousseau about the social contract, how we live together. I was having conversations with Freud and Jung about the psyche, with Margaret Mead about anthropology and how you change cultures, with Bob Dylan and Cat Stevens, because they were very good at getting the word out, getting things known to the public. So at the end of 5 days, I had about a 40-page document that I considered to be this new holy book. I had about 40 copies Xeroxed. I sent off about 20 to friends and relatives, and I think I was very lucky at that time that my family, my parents were all on the East Coast, and here I was on the West Coast, where I could have been a casualty that I will describe a little more about that happens to other people in a similar state. And the others I just handed out to people in the streets. I went actually to Telegraph Avenue, to that area right in front of Cody's. Cody's doesn't exist now there, but it actually looks very similar to the way it looked back then. There's still people there selling tie-dyed T-shirts and handmade jewelry, and it looks still very much like it did back then. And I just literally handed these books out to people, thinking that that this was kind of like the new center of the world, the new Jerusalem, and that if I distributed these copies there, they would make their way around the world, and I would soon be, recognized as being the prophet of this new religion. So believing that, of course, I didn't really think I needed to do anything like support myself or pay for food and lodging or any of those things. I was just kind of waiting to be discovered in my true role.